Hi, I'm Mark Michelson. Welcome to Connects Live. We are here today with Andrew Griffiths, and we're going to be talking about how to improve employee and customer experiences at the same time through business outsourcing. So Andrew, welcome. Appreciate you joining us today. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what your company does.
So it's always a difficult question when people ask me where I'm from, because it's like, how far back do we need to go in time? So to get it out of the way, the inevitable question that comes up is, I'm a British guy who lives in the US, currently reside in Colorado. I've been here for almost a decade, not planning on going anywhere. So this is what I call home now. Outsource Consultants is in the contact center outsourcing space, and our specialty is finding the ideal fit for when a client wants to outsource. We have about 500 BPOs in our portfolio, and we help the client make the choice of the right one for them. So what I was intrigued when Mark and I were talking about what would be useful for the audience was, usually when you look at outsourcing, it's not necessarily a thing that dovetails well into the existing in-house contact center, which is a shame because there's some fantastic opportunities to make the two work in tandem. So that was what I was hoping we could focus our discussion on today is, taking a traditional solve to a problem and applying it to a slightly different problem. That's in my experience where most innovation comes from, is just shifting slightly the mindset and bring something in that may be atypical, but has been proven out in similar circumstances.
So within this context, it was fascinating because we were just chatting out of the blue, I guess, meet serendipitously the folks who you do. And what was interesting to me was our discussion around the idea of there's such a shortage right now of labor, of just people willing to work, particularly in not going to call centers anymore, for instance. Okay, you're working from home. And so taking some of the load off of them by looking at outsourcing. I'm just, with the labor shortage the way it is and the rush coming on, how do you feel about the accepting of or the feeling of, do companies in the US, for instance, how do they feel about outsourcing right now in this climate?
And you're right, that's been one of the pivotal changes in attitude. And it's interesting that as humans, often we're resistant to changing our behavior. If we've done something a certain way, that's the way that we do it. And until we're forced to change our behavior, we don't give an alternative the time of day. So what we're seeing now is there's not a long line of people coming to us and saying, hey, we've just decided that outsourcing is something we want to consider for the first time. They're coming to us and saying, we're in a hole. We can't hire people. We've upped our hourly wage, $3, $5, however many dollars, and we still can't get enough people. And to your point, Mark, it's the time where a lot e-commerce companies, retail, there's a lot of healthcare seasonal demand that peaks in Q4. So we noticed this problem back 3-4 months ago and started telling everybody there's a labor shortage. They were seeing it in the real world, like going to restaurants and seeing signs on the door, apologizing before you walked in about the slow service because of lack of staff. We were starting to see that effect in the contact center world very early. And if we'd had this conversation 3-4 months ago, the majority of people would have said that we were fear mongering and that it wasn't in fact really a big problem because it hadn't started to hit yet. That shift has already happened. And it's earlier, typically in August, it's still August, that people, they're starting to think about the Q4 ramp. And we expect, even before the recent developments with the COVID situation, added complexity to the situation. Before that, we were saying that Q4 was going to be tough. Our general advice was, whatever you would normally do in September, do it in July or August, right? Get ahead of it, because with every supply and demand situation, when there's a restrictive supply, the prices go up as more and more demand is consumed. The silly example I use is trying to buy a 2x4 at the Home Depot. You could still buy them, they just went up to $9. I think they've actually come down a little bit. But the point is that, the message of you won't be able to get people is not necessarily correct. The message of you won't be able to get people at a price point that works for your organization is really the issue.
So is it pricing that we're trying to, I guess, solve around, or is it something different, like improving their experience? Now, how does, it's kind of a different thing, if you're alleviating some pain within your current workforce, right? The mundane tasks and things like that, versus I just want to decrease my costs and not even worry about having anyone here.
Right. So it's interesting, right? Because traditionally, if you ask people why they outsource, there's usually a financial component to it, traditionally, especially the large scale outsourcing. So what I just did is took a labor shortage, which has created new companies coming into the market for contact center outsourcing that haven't previously considered it because they haven't needed to. And then I diminished it down to a price point, which was, oversimplifying the situation. And there's a lot of nuance between that point. The reason that the bottom line is always price is if you had an in-house contact center and your culture was decent and you take care of people and you offered them $50 an hour, I don't think you'll have any trouble staffing it. So it is a price problem in its simplest form, but getting the right types of employees, retaining those employees at a price point that works for the business, because obviously $50 an hour for a contact center employee is not a workable number. To do that, one of the interesting things, and you can see this, if you look at anybody who's overworked, because the company can't hire peers for that individual. So they're overworked, they've got fewer people around them in the team. The empathy that they're able to extend to the customers, the patients that they have, all of those things that we look for in great CX, those are the first things to go. So that combined
stress and
right, it's you can't really expect anything else from them because these are human beings that we're talking about. You put anybody under enough pressure and everybody has their level, right, of where that pivot happens, but you can get there with anybody with sufficient pressure. Nobody's intending to put the pressure on these folks, but it is the side effect of not being able to hire enough people. Mm-hmm. So that's one problem. The other problem that happens is the ones that are best under that pressure for an extended period of time are the ones most likely to leave. The ones that are less excellent at what they do are the ones that are most likely to stay. So your retention isn't linear. You don't lose the equal number of top performers, bottom performers, and the 80% in the middle. You tend to lose from the lower ranks. So the problem further exacerbates itself. So then outsourcing becomes one of the potential ways to, not like the old days, replace your in-house agents, but augment them and make their experience better so that they can continue to do the excellent job for the customer that they've always been doing. So go ahead.
Fascinating. So we do have a couple of questions. I want to sort of move over to them just a bit, but when you think about just resolving issues and outsourcing, I've worked personally, I've helped set up a few outsourcing agencies in India and China and places like that. And there's different tasks that the different cultures can take on or not. We have a great question here from Carl. Carl, come on screen here and ask your question here, if you will.
And thank you. And you might have hinted at it, to start with, Andrew, but let me just kind of ask it here. I'm just thinking from a CX perspective, how, when you outsource the call center activities, I'm thinking that internally, because I've worked in organizations, had an internal call center, and there was a certain amount of CX training, if you will, done with those folks. And to bring it up to a level of where they wanted the organization to be from a customer-centric perspective. But when you begin to outsource, how do you how do you handle the fact that it may not take on the same characteristics as the internal call center? How do you, and I think Brett Shaw might have asked a similar question here, but it has to do with quality control of of the process. How do you manage that? How do you keep that?
Right. So if you look at it, basically what you're doing when you outsource, and this is predicated on if you outsource to a high quality BPO. Like everything in the world, there's levels, right? So who we deal with and the people that we've selected to be in our portfolio are the ones that do a great job. So the staff that you have, let's take your in-house example. You have staff that are there that understand those expectations of CX and measure the daily performance of the agents against that expectation on an ongoing basis. Whether this is remotely in today's world or brick and mortar, doesn't matter. It's the same process. You're just outsourcing that function too. So it's not that it goes away. There's this sort of myth that once you outsource, you lose control. Well, take your iPhone. I mean, that's made in a factory in China, but Apple still control the quality of the end product. You can still do the same with contact center outsourcing. In fact, the argument, and it's the same argument that people made for moving technology to the cloud, because you're not dealing with the day-to-day hiring, retaining, oh, Jamie's sick today and won't be in, and how do we redo the schedules and all of those things, you can actually focus on the bit that's important to the business, which for most businesses is, are the KPIs being met? Is the CX where it needs to be? What can we do to improve? And by taking the tactical day-to-day implementation of that and outsourcing that piece along with the agents, then you can actually, as the brand, have better clarity of the things that matter to you.
So yeah, so it seems, yeah, those things can be managed. I mean, I was in a situation where we used an external call center, and that had to be constantly managed from a CX perspective. And I was in that position of having to do that.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think there may be a difference between like outsourcing your actual customer facing call center and all the activities that have to be in there to close the loop. You know, there's a lot of stuff that is loaded into a call center agent to take action on.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if there is a distinction when you do outsource of customer facing things versus background things.
I mean, where that comes up most commonly is voice versus some other form of text-based communication.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there are places we can outsource to in the world where for the American palate, the British palate, the language, the accent difference becomes an issue. Doesn't show up the same way in written stuff. So a segregation of tasks based on either how that request comes in or where they are in the process is entirely possible. I'm a proponent of solving the problem with the right tool for the problem. This is whether it be, you know, my call volumes are too high, so I want to put a piece of technology up front to do some call avoidance and to let people know about self-service, which they may actually prefer if they were aware of it. Like that is a part of the puzzle, but so is that human interaction. And finding the right human, you know, I would just advocate for outsourcing is another pool of resource above and beyond who you can hire internally, and treat it as one pool from the customer's perspective.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's fascinating because you do, you know, I've called a lot of call centers. Everyone does, right? We all have experiences with call centers. Usually it's a problem. Very rarely. I'm calling that guy, I love you, you know, and it's like the first thing you get is, you know, you could solve your problem on your own by visiting, you know, AT&T.com or whatever, right? And that stuff goes on forever until someone, you know, gives you an option to talk with a human. But the text thing too is a lot of that's going to bots, right? And that's another way to kind of alleviate. And there's a lot of discussion around AI chat tools and things like that.
Sure.
Just as context. We do have a couple more questions. Brett, yours was similar, and we're right in line with what your question is. So come on here, if you will, and put on your video and mic and ask your question.
I love the question you just, or the comment you just made, Mark, because I think what we spend a lot of time with kind of companies and call centers is it's not so much about the people, either the availability or the skills necessarily. I think there is a training thing that absolutely needs to happen. But I think what we really find out is it's really more about the empowerment and the processes that really allow them to do their job well. And I think that's the disconnect that the organization and call centers tend to have. And I think if you were to then, the companies that I've seen that then outsource it, you've added in another level of approvals, different standards, different processes to that kind of makes it a little more complex. Like AT&T is a good and bad example, right? In the fact that they've got everything outsourced and there's so many layers of complexity now that they can't fix many of their problems because they have to all rely on third parties to be able to get it done, and third parties all each have their own standard. And so AT&T, like your example was, Apple still controls the iPhone. Either AT&T's more relaxed about that's, we need to own it and set a standard, or it's just not there. So can you help explain to me how companies would be able to maintain their still level of standards and control in that process with this approach?
Yeah, and one of the difficulties with outsourcing is there's sort of this myth that when you outsource, problems like authorization to spend money to excuse me, to fix problems, or just the processes that are necessary to get things resolved in a clean fashion and have frictionless or low friction CX, that those magically are resolved by the company you outsource to. And if you take a bad internal contact center with issues and outsource it, shockingly, the results are not that dissimilar. So this is why, you have to understand, yes, we can solve labor problems. Yes, we can potentially tap into areas in the world that are lower cost, and that brings benefits to the organization. But those problems that you have don't automatically go away. So if you have a convoluted hierarchical structure and nobody's empowered to solve problems, that AT&T example, if that was all in-house, would still be the same frustration for the client that it is outsourced. I don't think we can typically say that's the fault of outsourcing. I see this more as the outsourced contact center is a department within the organization, and that department has rules it follows. Now, if the company you outsource to has constraints beyond what the brand, the client imposes themselves, then I would look at that and say, if that's the cause of the problem, is that the right place to outsource to?
We have a comment here too from Michael Wolf, who says the U.S. has a skills shortage and not a labor shortage. Prove me wrong. So when you're in that kind of mindset of, what should you outsource or not, right? Michael, did you have anything more to add on that, or do we want to address the idea of can it be proved wrong?
Yes, this is a personal observation for having been in business for a little over 25 years. 25 years ago, when I consulted with a company in the area of analytics, you could rely that the person that you're dealing with in the corporate world was fairly knowledgeable about the subject. Not so much anymore. In fact, I have kind of a cynical view, is that corporate America doesn't really do any work anymore. They're all just project managers. And that's a serious issue. That is, in my opinion, that is a skill shortage issue. And it does not do a company good to be in that situation.
It gives consultants an opportunity.
Yeah.
Just an aside. But Andrew, how do we address that through the idea of outsourcing? Are there skills that are available if you outsource to someone that we do not even know about or have as a US based company?
So I think we're touching on part of the subject here that I always like to include in these conversations, and that if you outsource, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to leave the US. So maybe that US based company, I'm not going to try and prove the statement wrong that we have a skill shortage. I'm not that ambitious. So I'll leave the comment as it stands, but if you don't have the skill set within the company, maybe it's because you have a fantastic skill set somewhere else. And we're seeing that the attempt to be generalists is less common, and that company says, we're great software developers. Or I pick that example because it's easy for me. We're great at developing this product, but we're terrible at taking care of our clients. We know this is what we want to happen, but we're so busy coming up with this world-changing piece of software that all of the other stuff that goes along with it, which is critical to our success, we don't want to deal with. But we don't want to have it in a foreign country. Well, sure, you can go to a BPO based in the US. That's what they do. That's their core business, right? Is dealing with problems. You can find one that has experience in similar, whatever level of software troubleshooting, customer support you want, and you can outsource that piece. So if the skills are available within the US, and that's a big hairy subject, then we can tap into it through another organization. Doesn't have to be something that you bring in-house.
So outsourcing doesn't always mean overseas. I think that's a real sticking point today's climate, in particular. It's always been lingering, but over the past 5-6 years or so, it's become more front burner topic. We have another great comment here, a question from Stephanie. So Stephanie, if you would like to join us here for a sec.
Sure, Andrew. Wow, this is really enlightening. Achievement anxiety, self-confidence. There's so many conflicts about employee motivation. Just in your own walk, because you ride right and left brain as I'm observing here, what motivates people that you work with in teams, either at managerial level or on the front line? Motivation.
What motivates the team that I work with?
Or what do you think are the two or three motivators when there's so much that's swirling around with anxieties and
right?
The tasks, for instance, is it a task-driven thing that people, if I hate doing something, someone else wants to do it?
Right.
Is there anxiety in that?
So that's interesting, right? And I'll give you an example on a semi-personal level. I spend my weekends remodeling my house. Most of the people in the organization I work for cannot comprehend why on earth anybody would do that for recreational purposes. Blows their mind. They think it's the most horrible way to spend a weekend. They're very polite about it and supportive, but it's not something that makes sense to them. And I think that's part of making work effective for people. Is it's somewhat on the employee to figure out where they fit. And some people are tasked lists and checking stuff off. Some people are creative, big picture stuff, connecting people. And yes, Stephanie, I don't know which of those camps I sit in. It depends on the moment, personally. Like I have this weirdly split personality when it comes to that. But what is horrific for one individual, maybe a highly empathic, connector with other humans, those tasks that happen after the call, or those just real basic things that there's a lot of process involved, they might be the worst way to spend a day. They might leave after having some, really tough conversations and helping clients. If they have 20 of those in a day, they might leave saying that was the best day ever. I loved it. But then they have to do stuff, just clicking mouses and changing stuff and resetting passwords. Drives them crazy. And yet the next person sat next to them could be the exact opposite. So when one of the suggestions that we were putting forward for this conversation is, if you have those tasks that your current team, awesome as they might be, just loathe doing, that doesn't mean that's a bad thing to outsource. And part of where we fit into the picture and where we get excited is, it almost doesn't matter what you bring to us from a contact center outsourcing perspective. We know where to put it, and we have that giant portfolio that's going to make, I wouldn't go so far to say make somebody's day, but be a great fit, right? When we understand that those organizations and their processes and their specialties well enough that we can put it in a place where it's valued more than it would be at the original brand contact center.
Stephanie, get your question?
I think so. I was looking for 2 or 3 motivators, but I think you more broadly dialed it in for me, and it's not easy. And it's changing because the next generation is so used to customization. I was used to one kind of Coca-Cola, and now at the beverage, our choices are a cornucopia. So I think,
And, you know, without meaning to like put my history onto you, there was an element of some of the stuff's going to be good, some of the stuff's going to be pain, and you just work through it and it'll all wash out in the end. That was kind of my early career. And I'm not sure that was the best approach. Maybe the approach of let's find what's good for me, and I can bring more value to the company I work for and be more fulfilled in the meantime, even though we, as a society, like to pick on specific age groups and bash the ones that we're not in. I completely disagree with that. I don't think it's a bad thing to figure out, you know, that symbiotic relationship. And if you can do that earlier in your life, chances are that when you look back on your life, you'll reflect more positively. I think there are great lessons for us all to take from that.
You know, it's fascinating too, because I mean, not only the skill sets of every human are different and varied, even through the day. We all are different people at different times, right? The idea that you can take service design, right? A bigger picture thinking. I'm not just filling a hole because I have a problem, but I'm going to design our service experience and know how to fill in things to take the load off or the pain points off of employee engagement with customers so that they can do the thing. It's kind of like, you know, real simplicity. If you have a pizza shop, right? Someone's got to make the pizza, someone's got to deliver it, someone's got to take the order, right? Is that all? If you're doing all 3 of those, you're going to be maxed out, right? And so the basics you have to have: someone to cook it, someone to take an order, someone to deliver it. And this kind of situation, if you look at a service design, right, you can say, what part of that can I most logically outsource and not only save a buck, but actually focus on improving the quality because of the level of focus? Is that where this is sitting?
Yeah, and you know, you went to a pizza shop. I went to that child's toy where you fit the shapes through the holes. That always comes into my mind, and it's like you can make that work if you have a big enough hammer. And that's what tends to happen when you are down to, you know, there's 9 holes in the toy, but you've lost 6 of the pieces, so you've only got 3, and that's your internal team, and you need to fill all 9 holes. You as leaders and as designers, based knowing we've only got 3 pegs, we'll make it fit in every hole, but sometimes we'll need a large hammer. If sorry, but that's kind of what's in my head. Obviously, it's lunchtime for you when you're thinking of pizza. I'm thinking of hammers. You know, it's okay.
Well, you know, you can break the structure if you hit too hard often.
Right. Or you can look to say, you know what, we've got 3 of these 9 holes perfectly filled. Maybe if we extend the pool out to outsourcing, we can get the perfect fit for the other 6.
Excellent. Well, we're getting ready to close out this recorded portion. Andrew, you have been terrific. I think it's something we really need to think about as far as our overall structure, particularly when it comes to service design and design thinking. Don't just consider this as a quick fix, but rather a part of your overall thought process of what can be reasonably taken off your plate, more or less, and put into a focused operation.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Just to remind everyone, we are postponing our events to next year, to 2022. We had them planned for this year, and due to the rise of the Delta variant, it makes best sense for us to look at next year, and hopefully we'll be able to come and meet in person then. More to come on that, and keep your eyes on the news. It seems to be changing every day. So we're going to go into our networking time now and chat about outsourcing as well as other topics. So if you were here, you'd be meeting some new folks. If you're watching this on a recording, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Thank you very much. Audrey, take us out.